producer to this very program 30 years ago, who was here to talk about the history of High Noon Friday. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Hey, my pleasure.
So tell us, and all our listeners, how the idea for High Noon Friday first came about.
The idea for High Noon Friday generated from an idea that Dan Berggren had, along with David Kettle, who was also the first host of High Noon Friday for a year or two, I think. And
Singular host?
Singular host. Oh, yeah, it was Dave. And that came about in Radio 1 production class. What was that?
Programming production
class. And everybody had to pick their project. Dan pulled me aside because he had a special project for me here, obviously. And for some reason thought that I would be able to handle something like this. And assembling, essentially, a lot of the work that was done in the programming production courses, because everybody had to produce something for that week, for the class. So I had a lot of instant material right there. But what Dan wanted to do was present a news magazine of the air, which really didn't exist at that point. And this was also something that was going to be a bridge between the campus and the community. And it was to encompass, his words at the time, it had to encompass everything the station had to offer. So if it was music, what kinds of music was it? It was, it was everything, because back then it was the beginning of world music and all this crazy stuff that happened since. But there was so many aspects of the station that had to be represented. From comedy, you had obviously news. We were local, we were out there in the community as well. And that mixed with some comedy and more music, courtesy of the band that I was in, that I always made sure we got a song in there every week. And that became a news magazine of the year, hosted by Dave Kettle. And a lot of fun.
I'd heard that there was a community member doing interviews at the time during this show slot, and that became part of the show, or was an inspiration for part of the show.
Dave.
That was Dave, essentially. Okay. Dave was very connected to the community. He knew everybody. And we had whatever was going on at the time in the community. And there were controversial issues, and we got, kind of took a side on some things, I think, which is, the way it goes. And but it was a mix of very serious, because Dave had a very serious voice and he was very serious himself. But it also mixed the comedy and the music and the craziness of it, which I was so happy to hear that thing with
Meg's Moments.
Meg's Moments. I was like, yeah, now you're talking. I like to throw in a lot of that stuff when I had the chance with the skits that we had from students.
Speaking of comedy skits and everything, what were some of the interesting segments that were featured on the program?
Well, one was Pastor Joe Bob, and that was our illustrious alumni, Skip Tillinghast, who may be listening, I don't know, no, Buffalo's out of range.
Online.
Skip Tillinghast produced that spot with me, and it was pretty bizarre. If you know what Stephen Colbert's persona is, this is what he did, maybe 30 years before. It was pretty cool. But we also had AccuFarmer. That was Spanky Prince. And he essentially misheard everything. Oh no, he eventually just ended up talking about the farm. It had nothing to do with a farm report. It ended up being what he did that morning and all the work it was, and it was goofy and stuff like that.
I'm curious where the idea to mix all this comedy, entertainment with valuable news and information, where did that come from?
Probably me. No, that was no, it wasn't. It was not. It was Dan. It was like a pie chart, and we wanted to put in everything the station really had to offer, and everybody contributed. Ultimately, I got to choose what went in, because I'd be sitting there in the queuing right here, cutting up tape and making it fit into an hour, writing out the script, and back timing everything, and working with Justin Foy, our original engineer, also Fredonia, obviously alum, working on WDSD right now in Woodstock. How you doing, Justin? And that was it. I mean,
how many people did it take to put on an episode of High Noon then?
It was all me. No. It was me there Thursday night till 1 in the morning. Cutting tape is what it was. No. It was, how many people? I mean, it was like, I'd have all these segments submitted to me, a lot of them from the radio classes, and you'd kind of have to choose and pick which ones worked,
What were some of the first responses from people listening to the show? What did they think about it?
It was off the charts. No, it was everybody who ever heard it loved it. No, it was
all three of them.
All three people. All three people on the Edge. It was called The Edge. Yes, it
Speaking
was.
of The Edge,
I still call it The Edge.
Was the show simulcast on the
Yes,
AM?
It was. First of its kind in Fredonia. So it was definitely a simulcast, which was not the case all the time.
And it was also rebroadcast either some years later, like Friday evening, and sometimes Saturday at noon, to expand the audience.
Right. So really High Noon Friday at that point, it was
You didn't have to change the title?
Called
No.
The Leftovers. No.
Speaking of the name, who, just out of curiosity, who came up with the name?
That was me. No, that was Dan. That was Dan. That was his whole concept, the whole idea.
And oh, go ahead.
What were some of the challenges that you faced? I mean, it sounds like it all came together really well, but I mean, as we all know,
No.
there are lots of challenges
No.
along the way. So what were some of them that you faced?
Well, when I'd lose my iPad, and I wasn't able to edit. No. It was all gathering tape. It was deadlines, and people promised you a certain segment. You had to follow up with it. And I think the best thing about it is it gave me my first experience in managing people, trying to get something out of people, get something better out of people. And here I was a peer, so of course I felt a little weird about that, you know.
And you were a senior when you were producing High Noon?
Was that a senior year or junior? 84. I would have been a junior.
Well, what did you do after you graduated? Where did you go after High Noon?
I did a little bit of radio. I didn't do, as much as I originally had wished, I guess. I did a year and a half in Lowell, Massachusetts on a station there. But then the lure of retail. No, I ended up being manager at FYE for 15 years, and then from there, district manager of different businesses.
Do you miss anything about doing radio at Fredonia?
Oh, everything, yeah. It was so much of a blast. I mean, it was our freedom. It was our, I think for everybody who did it, this was a chance to get away from everything else happening on campus or downtown or whatever was going on with your roommate, whatever. This was the place to go.
Did you have any idea that, the show you started or you were the first producer of would be still around 30 years later?
Yeah, I didn't think you guys had a chance. No. I'm really glad it is. I'm amazed it is. It's so cool. Yeah, he pulled me aside and told me, I think you can do this.
So Dan, what did you see in Chris that made you make that choice?
Yes, what was it?
I don't know.
And are you
He
sorry?
doesn't shut up for one thing, that's it.
Sold out!
As he just said it, being a manager, that he learned on the spot how to manage people and resources. And he must have had that in him, but choosing a career in managing, a record, the FYE, and then managing anything, I think that's one of the things that students get as they rise up from freshman year doing their first air shift or news gathering to being on the board before they graduate. You learn how to work with people. You learn how to cooperate, how to get things. You have to do the legwork before you end up being a producer of a show. You have to do the legwork before you end up being a program director of CVF or TVO.
I think the best thing was, I like to remember because at that point I was a little, a little more hot-headed maybe, let's say. So, tact and the way that you work with people and try to get information out of people or whatever, or try to get someone on your team was a little bit different when you're 20, 21 years old as opposed to now,
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, are there any, we all have shows that really stick out in our mind that were awesome, we had awesome guests or really awesome segments or things that just flowed really well. Are there any that stick out in your head?
I have a couple in my head, and I have them on cassette somewhere. It would be nice to bring them and transfer them. There's just a couple where it was after the show had been on the air for a month, so a lot of the kinks had been worked out. But everybody's spot was there, and it just was the perfect fit, and Dave Kettle could speak on everything that was going on. We may have had somebody in town, a local artist, on that day, and of course we had great music at the Caesarean rhythm section. No, I just remember some of them really going well, that's all.
I'm curious, in the past 4 years that I've been here, it seems that the show has very embraced the idea of guests. We always bring in whoever are the big people coming through Fredonia at the time. Was that the case 30 years ago, and who did you meet? Who did you talk to?
I got to, well, not me. I mean, a lot of times it was people who brought them in, but anybody who played on campus, we tried to interview them. We tried to get them on campus, and we did. You remember some off the top of your head after the first couple of years? Because we had a lot of local, even in politicians.
Local guests, local politicians, and then comedians. I don't know if anybody got an interview with Bill Cosby, but comedians that would do big shows in King Concert Hall, and musicians that would come and do a show either at King or in the campus center.
Well, that is awesome, and we are so happy to keep the tradition alive here at High Noon Friday. So thank you so much for speaking with us.
Hey, thanks.
And we will be hearing from you and Dan and
The
all
rest
of your
of the band.
friends. Yes, at the in a couple minutes actually. The end of the hour is almost up, but you'll be playing some music for us. But right now we have one more segment we want to air, a weekly favorite.